The moon hung low in the sky, a pale orb casting feeble light upon the desolate street before me. I stood at the edge of the empty thoroughfare, my heart pounding in the stillness of the night. The air felt heavy, pregnant with an unspoken dread that seemed to seep through my skin. My footsteps echoed hollowly as I took a hesitant step onto the cracked pavement, drawn by an inexplicable force toward the heart of the forsaken avenue. The buildings that lined the street were like silent sentinels, their windows shattered and their facades marred by the ravages of time. Shadows danced in the corners of my vision, whispering secrets that I strained to hear. I shook my head, attributing the unease to my overactive imagination, but a shiver crawled down my spine nonetheless. As I ventured deeper into the street, the silence became deafening. Not even the distant hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves dared to break the stillness. My footsteps became hesitant, each one measured and cautious, as if I were a trespasser in a forbidden realm. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to find eyes watching me from the shadows, but there was only the empty expanse of the street behind me. A cold breeze brushed against my cheeks, causing me to wrap my arms around myself for warmth. The moonlight played tricks on my perception, distorting the shapes and angles of the derelict buildings. I blinked, my eyes struggling to adjust to the shifting reality before me. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper carried by the wind. A wordless voice that seemed to beckon me forward, promising secrets and revelations hidden in the heart of the night. Against my better judgment, I followed the ghostly call. Each step felt like a descent into the unknown, as if I were willingly surrendering myself to a force beyond my control. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of unintelligible words that clawed at the edges of my consciousness. My pulse quickened, and a bead of sweat trickled down my temple. The street seemed to stretch endlessly before me, the buildings looming like ancient giants waiting to swallow me whole. Panic tightened its grip around my chest, but something compelled me to continue. I tried to call out, to break the silence with my voice, but no sound escaped my lips. The night held me captive, a pawn in its chilling game. Abruptly, I stumbled upon a scene that froze my blood. A circle of flickering candles formed a mystic pattern on the pavement, their feeble flames casting dancing shadows upon the ground. In the center of the circle stood a figure, draped in tattered robes that fluttered in the wind like the wings of a spectral creature. The figure's face was obscured by darkness, but its presence exuded an aura of malevolence that left me paralyzed. I wanted to flee, to turn and sprint back the way I came, but my limbs refused to obey. The figure raised its arms, its bony fingers stretching toward the moonlit sky. The whispers intensified, forming a symphony of terror that resonated in the very core of my being. And then, with a single wordless incantation, the figure thrust its arms downward, and the candles flared to life with an unnatural intensity. The circle of flames cast eerie shadows that danced in grotesque patterns upon the figure's robes. The air grew frigid, and a sensation of suffocating dread enveloped me. My vision blurred as if reality itself were bending and warping. I tried to scream, to tear my gaze away, but I was held captive by forces far beyond my understanding. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the ritual ended. The figure's robes billowed one last time before dissipating into nothingness, leaving me alone in the midst of the infernal circle. The candles guttered and died, plunging the street into darkness once more. The whispers receded, leaving only the sound of my own ragged breathing. I turned and fled, my feet pounding against the pavement, my heart racing as if it might burst from my chest. The empty street seemed to stretch endlessly, a maze of shadows and secrets that threatened to consume me whole. I didn't dare look back, fearing that the figure might reappear, that its malevolent eyes might fix upon me once more. Finally, I burst forth from the street, gasping for breath as I stumbled onto a well-lit avenue. The normal sounds of the city embraced me, the distant hum of traffic, the faint laughter of revelers. But the terror of the empty street lingered like a haunting refrain in my mind. I knew that I had ventured into a realm beyond the mundane, a place where nightmares took shape and reality was but a fragile illusion. And as I walked away from that forsaken street, I couldn't shake the feeling that the night was still watching, that the whispers still lingered, and that the horrors I had witnessed were far from over. In the forgotten depths of an ancient forest, a malevolent presence lurked. A creature whispered about only in hushed tones. They called it the Voradrex, a name that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared to speak it. Legends painted a horrifying portrait of this elusive being, a nightmare-made flesh that stalked the woods with a hunger for the unwary. The Voradrex was said to be born from the darkest corners of the human psyche, an amalgamation of fears and nightmares given life by some ancient curse. It was a creature of shifting shadows, its form never truly solid, forever morphing to match the deepest fears of those who crossed its path. Some claim to have seen it as a towering skeletal figure with elongated limbs and bony fingers that resembled claws. Others spoke of a shapeless mass of darkness that slithered like a serpent through the underbrush, its presence betraying its fluid nature with unsettling ripples. One fateful night, I found myself alone in that forbidding forest, a place where the moon's light struggled to pierce the thick canopy above. I had heard the stories, the tales of those who had encountered the Voradrex and never returned. But curiosity and a foolish bravado drove me deeper into the woods, my heart pounding in my chest like a drumbeat of dread. With each step, the air grew heavy, as if the very atmosphere held its breath in anticipation. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees reaching out like gnarled fingers to entangle me in their grasp. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched by unseen eyes. As I moved further into the woods, the temperature dropped, a chill settling in my bones that had nothing to do with the weather. The rustling leaves seemed to carry faint whispers, as if the very trees were conspiring to communicate some dire warning. My own breath sounded too loud in my ears, a reminder that I was alone in a world where the Voradrex might be lurking just beyond sight. A branch snapped somewhere to my left, and I spun around, heart racing. The moon's light revealed nothing but the twisting undergrowth and the looming trees. But there was a shift in the shadows, a subtle movement that sent a shiver down my spine. My steps faltered, my fear urging me to turn and flee, but a morbid curiosity held me in place. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from all directions at once. My breath caught in my throat and I dared not move, my senses straining to locate the source of the sound. The forest fell into a silence so profound that even the whispering leaves seemed to hold their breath. Then from the darkness emerged a pair of eyes, glowing like twin orbs of malevolent fire. They hung suspended in the air, devoid of any discernible form, like the eyes of a predator lurking just beyond the veil of reality. My heart thundered in my chest, and I took an involuntary step back, my instincts screaming at me to flee. The eyes drew closer, their fiery gaze fixed upon me with an intensity that seared my very soul. The Voradrex was here, its form shifting and morphing as if it were plucking the very fears from my mind. In the blink of an eye, it became a towering figure with elongated limbs and twisted horns, a monstrous visage carved from the depths of my nightmares. Paralyzed with terror, I could only watch as the Voradrex drew closer, its eyes never leaving mine. The forest seemed to warp and contort around it, the very trees bending to its will as if under some unnatural compulsion. It emanated an aura of pure malevolence, a force that sought to feed on the terror it inspired. As it moved, I could hear a cacophony of whispers, a symphony of horrors that echoed in my mind. Images of my deepest fears flickered before me: darkness, isolation, the inexorable approach of death. I felt a pressure on my chest, a weight that threatened to suffocate me as the Voradrex's presence pressed down upon me. With every ounce of willpower I could muster, I tore my gaze away from its fiery eyes and stumbled back, my heart racing. I turned and ran, the forest a blur around me, my feet carrying me as far away from that nightmare as possible. The whispers faded, and the forest's oppressive grip loosened, but the memory of the Voradrex's eyes haunted me, etched into my mind like a scar that would never heal. When I emerged from the forest, gasping for air and drenched in cold sweat, I knew I had escaped the Voradrex's clutches. But I also knew that I had glimpsed something beyond the realm of mortal comprehension, a creature born of fears too terrible to imagine. The Voradrex remained a haunting enigma, a presence that would forever linger in the shadowy recesses of my mind, a reminder that some terrors were too real to be ignored. Stories told of this colossal monstrosity sent shivers down the spines of even the hardiest of souls. The creature was said to be an embodiment of nature's wrath, a result of the land's anguish and torment. Its form, an amalgamation of grotesque shapes and twisted limbs, defied the laws of biology. It moved with a sinister grace, navigating the underbrush without a sound, leaving only a sense of dread in its wake. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Casting long shadows across the forest floor, a feeling of unease settled upon me. I ventured into the heart of the woods, driven by an unexplainable curiosity that whispered tales of the creature's presence. My steps were cautious, my senses on high alert as if the very trees were watching my every move. The air grew thick with an unnatural stillness as I ventured deeper. The forest's symphony of chirping insects and rustling leaves fell silent, replaced by an eerie hush that seemed to stretch on forever. A shiver ran down my spine as a cold wind brushed against my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. In the distance, I caught a glimpse of movement, an unsettling dance of shadows that seemed to defy the laws of nature. My heart quickened and I hesitated, debating whether to retreat or continue forward. But a mixture of fear and morbid fascination pushed me on. As I moved deeper into the forest, the trees grew more twisted, their branches contorted into grotesque shapes that resembled outstretched hands. The ground underfoot became damp and squishy, the earth seeming to give way beneath my weight. The shadows played tricks on my perception, distorting the world around me into a nightmarish tableau, and then it emerged from the depths of the woods, an abomination of nature that should never have been. Its limbs were elongated and gnarled, ending in wickedly sharp claws that seemed more suited for rending flesh than navigating the forest floor. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with an otherworldly light, casting an unholy radiance upon its twisted form. I wanted to flee, to turn and run as far away as possible, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The creature moved with an uncanny grace, its body flowing like liquid through the underbrush, its limbs contorting in ways that defied the laws of anatomy. It was a creature born of nightmares, a macabre creation that should have remained hidden in the darkest recesses of the mind. Its gaze locked onto mine, and a chill settled deep within me. Its eyes seemed to bore into my very soul, a malevolent intelligence lurking behind the facade of its monstrous form. A guttural growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. I should have turned and fled, but a morbid curiosity held me in place. The creature moved closer, its every step a haunting echo in the stillness. The air grew colder, a palpable presence that pressed against my skin. The world seemed to narrow, the forest fading away until only the creature and I remained. With a sudden, swift motion, the creature lunged, its claws poised to strike. Instinct took over and I stumbled back, narrowly avoiding its deadly grasp. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I turned and sprinted through the twisted forest, branches clawing at my clothes, the creature's enraged roars echoing in my ears. As I burst through the edge of the forest, gasping for breath, I looked back one last time. The creature stood at the forest's edge, its eyes glowing like fading embers. It was a nightmare given life, a reminder that the natural world held mysteries far darker and more terrifying than we could ever comprehend. I stumbled back into the safety of civilization, shaken to my core by the encounter. The whispers of the forest's malevolent presence still lingered in my mind, a haunting refrain that would forever remind me of the creature that should never have existed. And as the sun's first rays broke through the horizon, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest still held secrets, waiting to ensnare those foolish enough to seek them. I found myself standing at the entrance of a narrow alley, a shadowy passage that seemed to beckon me with an eerie allure. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant promise of rain. The soft hush of leaves rustling in the breeze filled my ears, creating a symphony of whispers that both enticed and unnerved. As I took my first cautious steps into the alley, the world around me began to shift. The cobblestone path beneath my feet seemed to undulate like waves upon a dark sea, and the buildings on either side leaned inwards as if conspiring to keep their secrets hidden. My heart quickened, a drumbeat of unease that echoed in time with my footsteps. The moon's light filtered through the canopy above, casting elongated shadows that danced upon the walls. In those fleeting moments, I thought I saw movement, a flicker of movement just beyond my line of sight. I turned my head, but there was nothing there, only the alley's oppressive darkness. A chill crawled up my spine, a sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. I quickened my pace, determined to reach the other end of the alley and escape its grasp. But the path ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, each step lengthening the distance between myself and the exit. Panic welled up within me, its icy grip tightening with each passing moment. Then, as I rounded a bend, I caught sight of a figure, a silhouette against the moonlight. A man, tall and cloaked in tattered garments, stood at the far end of the alley, facing away from me. My heart raced, a mixture of fear and curiosity urging me forward. I called out to him, my voice trembling, but he didn't respond. It was as if the sound was swallowed by the very walls of the alley. Drawing closer, I noticed something odd about the figure's stance. His shoulders were hunched and his head hung low, obscuring his face. My steps grew hesitant, a creeping realization settling in my gut like a heavy stone. The alley's whispers grew louder, a symphony of eerie voices that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. With a trembling hand, I reached out and touched the figure's shoulder, my fingers grazing the fabric of his cloak. The moment my touch connected, a jolt of raw terror coursed through my veins. The figure's body was cold, unnaturally so, and his cloak disintegrated beneath my touch, dissolving into ash that scattered in the wind. The figure slowly turned towards me, revealing a face that would forever haunt my nightmares. It was a visage of decay and despair, the flesh clinging to bone in patches, eyes sunken and devoid of life. A gurgling rasp escaped its cracked lips, a sound that sent a wave of revulsion and dread through me. I stumbled back, my heart pounding like a war drum. The figure took a halting step forward, its movements erratic and disjointed, like a marionette controlled by unseen hands. The whispers around me grew louder, forming words that twisted and slithered in my mind, a cacophony of terror that threatened to drown out my own thoughts. I turned and sprinted back the way I came, my footsteps echoing like thunder in the confined space of the alley. But no matter how fast I ran, the exit remained maddeningly out of reach. The walls seemed to close in around me, their surfaces shifting and undulating as if alive. Desperation clawed at my chest, a primal instinct to escape the clutches of this nightmare realm. Just when it seemed I couldn't run any longer, the alley abruptly opened up, releasing me into the embrace of the moonlit night. I stumbled onto the cobblestone streets, gasping for air as if I had emerged from a watery abyss. The town around me had returned to its tranquil state, as if the horrors I had witnessed were mere phantoms of the mind. I collapsed onto my knees, shaken to my core by the ordeal I had just endured. The alley, the figure, the whispers, they lingered in my consciousness like a stain that could never be washed away. The moon hung above, casting its pale light upon the world, but I knew that darkness existed in places far deeper than the shadows it illuminated. And as I sat there, breathing heavily, I couldn't help but wonder what other terrors awaited those who dared to venture into the unknown corners of existence.